Welcome to the Relationship Mapping Workgroup, hosted by Prospect Research Institute. This is a free and informal workgroup for prospect researchers interested in discussing and learning about new relationship mapping tools and techniques. I'm Jennifer Filla, your moderator, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today, Marc Smith. Marc is a sociologist, director of the Social Media Foundation, and contributor to the NodeXL project. He will be sharing with us how he has used NodeXL for social media network analysis and visualization for the Social Media Foundation and for his clients at Connected Action Consulting.
Welcome. I very much appreciate you taking the time today to join me and Jennifer. And we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of networks, and we'll discuss a tool that makes doing network analysis as simple as perhaps it could be. So I'll start by telling you that I am a sociologist, and most of the time you can find me in Northern California in the Bay Area, where I work with this organization, the Social Media Research Foundation. We are a California nonprofit, and our goal is to build tools that facilitate the understanding of networks broadly, social networks in particular, and we have a very special focus on social media networks. And those would be any population that forms connections among themselves via Facebook, YouTube, Flickr, Twitter, email, blogs, wikis, Flickr, discussion boards, enterprise email, and we'll see that in a little bit. So what are we going to talk about? Well, here's some more of my contact information. You can find me all over the internet, and largely you'll see material related to the effort necessary to collect, analyze, visualize, and report on collections of connections among people in social media. At the core of our discussion today is this idea of social network theory. This is an area of sociology. It's about 90 years old. Really started to develop in about 1930 in New York City. And it has grown and changed over the years, but in essence, social network theory looks at groups of people and their relationships rather than collections of individuals. So a traditional approach to research would be to look at the attributes of all of those circles and not to look at the ways in which they are connected to one another. Network theory shifts our focus. It says that what we really care about are not the individuals. What we really care about are the relationships among them. So at the core of network theory is a series of vocabulary, of terms and measurements that describe and measure the shape, size, density, and properties of a group of things that are connected to each other. And so we will be looking at the world through this perspective. My goal is to encourage you to, as we like to put it, think link, to think about the world around you, not as a collection of individuals, but as a web or a mesh of connected relationships. And we have a language for talking about these things. The thing is going to be called a node. In some cases, we're going to call it a vertex. That's language that comes out of mathematics. And the thing that connects the two vertices, the line, we're going to call that an edge. And we might also refer to it as a tie or a relationship, a connection. And there are several concepts that related to the ways in which groups of people connect to one another, like who is at the center. We have this notion of centrality. And how many connections exist among them, a notion we call density. And so some people occupy positions in these networks that are quite different from others. If you look here and see the node labeled C, C is a very unique node in that it has the least number of connections to anybody else. It has only one connection, in this case to D, whereas almost everybody else has more than one connection to somebody else. So different people occupy different kinds of positions within these networks. So broadly, as a sociologist, my interest in the internet is that it is now the place where people gather. It is the public sphere. It's where civic society takes place. In most of North America, I think, the idea of a public square where people come and talk to each other is non-existent for the most part. There aren't that many places where people just gather. And even in the places where people do gather, the reality is that more people gather in cyberspace. More people talk about these events than ever physically gather in these spaces. It's my sense that about 750,000 people can cram into Tahrir Square, but the cyber Tahrir is orders of magnitude larger. And so we would like to evaluate or try to understand these patterns. Our job is to provide a mechanism whereby you could actually take a picture of that crowd. As we saw in the prior image, no doubt somebody took that picture. And if I tell you that thousands of people are gathering in a plaza or a square near you, probably somebody is going to say, send a photographer. But we have a problem. More people are gathering in the cyber squares, the online social media plazas of the world than ever will gather in the physical world. And so what is the equivalent of this device for cyberspace? And you may not recognize this device, but this was the first ever point-and-shoot camera on Earth. And this technology basically turned photography from being a professional skill to an amateur skill. And what I'm going to show you today is informed and inspired by this path. And our goal is to provide you with the digital point-and-shoot snapshot camera, but not for the physical world. We want to create a snapshot camera for the virtual world, something that you can point at any topic, any Facebook fan page or group, any hashtag, any email list, and come back with a network visualization and a network report, a way of looking at these crowds as connected structures rather than as simply isolated individuals. What we need to recognize is that crowds in the physical world are rich with meaning and information. We know how big they are. We know if they're divided, if they're angry or happy, if they're sad, if they are about to engage in conflict. I think all of us are as social actors, very, very attuned to the feel of a crowd. But here you can see, this is when Mr. Obama was calling for increased federal funding for social media research, I believe. And he's pointing over there at Twitter, and that, of course, is the Obama tweet stream. And my point is that that tweet stream has done damage to the shape of the crowd. It would be the equivalent of Mr. Obama saying to that crowd, okay, folks, I want you to line up single file. That would reduce a lot of the information in the crowd. It would also be very difficult to accomplish, but that's what Twitter does. It makes everybody line up single file, and it makes it difficult to answer questions like, who is the most important person in this discussion? Or questions like, is this really one crowd or is it more than one crowd? Are they divided in some way? And so we've built a tool to make it easy to now convert what you see here into this. This is the network map of people talking about President Obama. In this case, they're talking about the hashtag SOTU, State of the Union, a speech the American president gives every January here in the United States. What you can see is that it wasn't just one crowd. The crowd actually has a shape. There's structure in that crowd. And what I see is a pattern that we call the polarized or divided pattern, a pattern in which two groups of people are talking about the same thing, but for the most part, they're not talking about it with each other. If anything, they are, in many ways, turning their backs on one another and ignoring one another. And so this is a very common pattern whenever we are talking about U.S. political topics. Not every nation's politics look like this. Many do. The U.S. political network is actually more extremely divided than any other country's political topic networks that we have seen. And so what you're seeing here is the output of NodeXL. NodeXL is a project from the Social Media Research Foundation. It is a free and open network analysis add-in for Excel. If you have Excel and you're familiar with Excel, it is a very simple thing to add NodeXL, at which point Excel, which has many chart types, pie chart, line chart, bar chart, scatter plot, now has a new chart type, network. And this was generated from within Excel. You'll see in the visualization, each of the squares are the profile photograph of one user. And some of the squares are larger than others, and that represents the number of followers that person has. But you'll note that the graph has also been subdivided. We ran an algorithm known as a clustering algorithm, and we ran that algorithm and it divided the graph into segments. And the segments were then labeled with those words at the top of the box, and the labels are automatically derived from the words and the hashtags most frequently used by the people in that group, the people in that cluster, the people in that box. So we put people in different boxes because they're in a cluster that they share with the other people in the same box. And it is possible then to actually figure out who's who. What are they talking about? Why are they not one group? Why are they two groups? And I'm not sure how many Americans are on the call or U.S. Citizens. Many of you may be Canadian, and it may not be as obvious, but essentially G1 are liberals or Democrats, and they are talking about the idea of climate change and possibly imposing a tax on financial transactions. In contrast, Group 2 are conservative Republicans. They're talking about Tea Party and Rubio and TCOT, that's Top Conservatives on Twitter, and of course the word GOP, the name of the right-wing party in the United States, the Grand Old Party. So we're actually seeing some structure here by comparison to this earlier image where we saw a crowd and then we saw a linear list. What we're seeing here is an actual structure, the shape of the crowd. And from this map, we can tell a few things about the nature of the conversation. So more broadly, we can see that all of social media is inherently a network. It's all about somebody passing something to somebody else. I favorited you, I followed you, I linked to you, I liked you, I forwarded something to you. All of those things, the reply, the mention, all of these things are the creation of a connection between one person and another person. In aggregate, these connections actually tell a story. And you can see that in our earlier slide. The patterns of footprints in the sand tell us a lot about what has happened here. So, for example, which way did they go? Did they go alone or in pairs or in groups? Did they come on horseback? Did they bring a wagon or an animal with them? And after all, how long ago could this possibly have been? 8 to 10 to 12 hours from now, the tide's going to come in and wash it all away. And so there's a lot of meaning in these traces, these footprints left behind when people interact with one another on the internet. And our job is to analyze these footprints in the sand, to come up with some aggregate measure and some insight into these patterns. So it's worth noting that on the internet there are many kinds of connections, and that they are all slightly different from one another. Different tools create the connections. I can friend you in Facebook, but I follow you in Twitter. And the nature of these edges can also be different. These ties, we sometimes call them edges. Sometimes the edge can point in both directions at the same time. In the other cases, it points only in one direction. So the tie reply to, I can reply to you without you replying to me. And so that's a different kind of edge than, let's say, the connection is friends with on Facebook, where I can't really be your friend on Facebook unless you are also my friend on Facebook. So our job is to convince you to think link. We want you to stop seeing A as being separate from B, each with their own attributes. What we want you to start to think about is, in what way is A related to B? And as we mentioned, sometimes A is related to B, but B is not related to A. In other cases, A and B both share a reciprocated relationship. I sent you mail, you sent that mail back to me. But in other cases, it is a mutual relationship, things like Facebook friend. You can't really be my Facebook friend unless I am your Facebook friend. Or, the relationship is married to. Sociologists have studied this, and they have found that if you are married to someone who is not married to you, we recommend counseling. So not all of these relationships are the same. Some go in both directions, some only in one. In some cases, a relationship might go in one direction with a certain strength or a weight or a value, and then have a different value when it returns. So I sent you 1 or 2 mails, but you send me 10 or 20. And so that would give us 2 differently weighed edges. Even though there's an arrow going from me to you and from you to me, they're not the same weight of arrow. And then, of course, it could just be that it's a completely different edge. There's replying to you and then being friends with you, and these are 2 different kinds of things. So the interesting thing for a network scholar is that all of these very, very different social media platforms, and they are different from one another. Facebook is not YouTube. YouTube is not a wiki. But they do share one commonality, one thing that is uniform across all of these platforms. And that is that they create networks. And in fact, if they do not create a network, they do not deserve to be called social media. They may be called digital media, but social media is any tool that allows people to create connections with people. And so what we're interested in is collecting and analyzing this kind of data. And in order to do that, we need to find a way to represent a single relationship. And we do that with this, the edge list. An edge list is a single row that contains all the information a network application needs in order to figure out who is connected with whom. And as you see, all we need really is the unique identifier participant. If you can give me, and we sometimes call these a GUID, that's an acronym that's globally unique ID. If you give me 2 GUIDs, I will imply that A has a relationship with B. So there's an arrow from A to B. And then in that row, you might tell me things like, and you know what, A called B, and it was on Monday at 3 a.m. Or A replied to B, and it was on Tuesday at noon. And so we know something about the when and the what of the connection between A and B. But you see in the last 2 columns of this edge list table that we can also include information about individuals, like how much money have they donated previously, or how many events have they attended. And so these are the attributes of the individuals, and that's different from the attributes of the relationship among the individuals. But if you can get your data into this format in any text file, If you can import the data into Excel, we're done. That's all you need in order to build network data. And so while we will talk today a lot about social media, you may already have customer or donor relationship management data that amply provides the material needed to build a network. If you know who attended what event, you know who is friends with whom, then we can build any kind of graph you like with only a few clicks. So when you get that data into a spreadsheet, it looks like this. Here are people talking about the State of the Union, and you can see that we have a workbook. It has many worksheets, and there is the NodeXL ribbon up at the top of the page. Each row has a pair of names. In some cases, the names are the same, and that means that somebody tweeted, but they really didn't say anybody else's name, and therefore they get a link back to themselves. Versus when they do have somebody else's name in it, and then they get a link back to that person. So we'll see column A has one name and column B has another name. And then we have the information about the edge, when did it happen, what happened. There you see in column Q, that's the full text of the tweet. We go about doing some content analytics over that. We'll find out what words are popular, what kind of hashtags are popular, that kind of thing. So network theory tends to be unfamiliar to a lot of people, so I try to offer them a metaphor, if you will, and that would be real estate. Because after all, what are the three most important things in real estate? Good financing, good school system, and a good foundation. No. There are three most important things in real estate, and that would be location, location, location. If I tell you that a house is a shack and it's a tear down, and I ask you what it is worth, I think you probably are going to ask me the question, where is it? And if I tell you it's in Palo Alto, the answer is it's worth $1.5 million. Whereas anywhere else in the world, it might be worth a little bit less. So there is a difference, though. Real estate and social networks are not quite the same because social networks don't have location. On these graphs, on these maps, there is no up and there is no down. There is no north or south the way that we get for free on geographic maps and real estate maps. What we do get, though, is this notion of position. And I really should have made that read relative position. It's not where you are on the screen, it's how far are you from other things on the screen. And so what we see here, again, is the example of a polarized pattern. We have two groups, and they have very little connection to each other. So this is telling us that this is a political topic and that there's a kind of political hostility or disagreement. So what I'd like to show you is this tool that we've built. We've created this tool, NodeXL, and it is designed with the idea that our users are not software developers. They're not programmers. They're not necessarily even data scientists. But they do have a question. They have a research question. They have a business question. They need to answer that question, and they need to know something about the shape of a network. And so we want to provide them with a tool that is equivalent to MS Paint. There is another network tool out there called Gephi, and they describe themselves as the Photoshop of networks. And our motto is that we are the MS Paint of graphs. The idea being that it's simple enough to use that you don't even really need to read the book. But that didn't stop us from writing one. And so here is the book, Analyzing Social Media Networks with NodeXL, Insights from a Connected World. And there are my fine co-authors, Derek Hansen and Ben Schneiderman. Derek is now at Brigham Young University, and Ben Schneiderman continues after 30 years to be a professor of computer science at the University of Maryland. So this book is a particularly good way to get entry into the nature of social media, and it follows on this breakout bestseller. No doubt you've seen this in your airport bookstore about communities in cyberspace. So our goal is to achieve this: open tools, open data, open scholarship. We want to be a kind of Firefox for networks, a browser that's easy to use, free and open. Essentially, we want to make making a network chart as easy as making a pie chart. So This is because social network theory, while very powerful, has been almost impossible for mere mortals to use. And so our goal is to leverage spreadsheets as a way to reduce the barriers to entry for network data analysis. So we have three mottos, open tools, or three parts of our motto: open tools, open data, open scholarship. I'll take you through all three. First step is the tool, and you can go to nodexl.codeplex, C-O-D-E-P-L-E-X, nodexl.codeplex.com, and you'll find our distribution site. There's a message board there where you can get questions answered, and you can also get the software, and we'll point you towards our data sets. You can find data sets that may help you. So first step, open tools. The second step is that you get this tool in your ribbon. You can now see a bunch of buttons that help you get data, analyze data, visualize it, and publish it right in the ribbon within Excel. But our next goal is open data. So open tools to get data, and then open data, a platform for sharing that data. And I invite you to take a look at the site nodexlgraphgallery.org. And this is a website that is like Flickr, only for networks. It's Flickr for graphs. So you can go to NodeXL Graph Gallery and search, and you may find that somebody has already made a network map for a topic that is of interest to you. And our last goal is open scholarship. We're trying to write papers really towards two communities. One, the computer science community, where we're showing innovations in network analysis, but the other, the social science community, where we're trying to apply the tool to derive useful insights into social media, try to understand the landscape and shape of social media. That most recently has led to this report at qinternet.org, where we published our results about the patterns of network structures that we have found. And you'll find in this article, at the bottom of this page, you're going to see a diagram of the different kinds of network structures that we found. I'll talk about that in a little bit in this talk. So to do network analysis, you have to do these 5 things. And the good news is NodeXL does these 5 things automatically. It automates the process of getting data, storing it, analyzing it, visualizing it, and publishing it. In order to get data, if you are not a programmer, you're in a lot of trouble. There are very few ways to get data in the format you want just by going to Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. You don't find a button that says download my spreadsheet, which is a shame because for most people, that's exactly what they need to get. They don't have that. So what we have done is provided a series of graphical user interface data provider objects. And so you can, with just a few clicks, go to places like Exchange or Facebook or Flickr or MediaWikis or Twitter or YouTube and the web itself, and easily extract networks from that with a dialog box that looks like this. So no programming, no coding, no compiling, no database design, just tell us what topic you want, configure the dialog, hit OK. So the result is that we go and get you data, and the question is, well, what's that look like and where do we put it? And our answer is we put it in Excel. And here you're seeing the map of connections that formed around the account Gates Foundation. And there they are, the red square here in the center of this cluster. And you'll note that this is the cluster of people who all connect to Gates Foundation, but do not connect to each other. And so this is the audience segment of the Twitter graph for this topic. And this is distinct from, let's say, this group down at the bottom, where this is the community segment. This is the group of people who do say each other's names versus the first group where nobody said anybody else's name except Gates Foundation. Otherwise, they would have a connection between them. So our next to last step is to analyze the data to calculate a range of network metrics to measure the size, the shape, the density, the connectivity of the graph. And here you see the list of a major set of network metrics, not all of the network metrics, but a large collection of them. And it will simply calculate all of those metrics and then drop them into the spreadsheet for you. But the last step, next to last step, is data visualization. What we need to do is draw a picture of that data, giving you a spreadsheet with all that tabular data, interesting but difficult to consume. What I really want to do is look at a picture for about a half of a second and immediately know a lot of things about the nature of the conversation. Like this one is also a divided conversation. This is people talking about Medicare. So the last and final step is that if we do not get it out, we do not share your results are mostly pointless. What we need to do is help you share the information with others. And so we've implemented this idea of NodeXL Graph Gallery, and our users now can routinely upload and share. And importantly, other users can then download and analyze other people's data. So what good is it? Why would we bother to go through all this effort to build a network map of a topic or hashtag? And the answer is that we are going to find the key influencers in any topic. We're going to find the mayor of your hashtag. We're going to learn whether or not there are divisions, and if there are divisions, we're going to find out if anybody is the bridge, the link that crosses the divide. So we're going to look for certain kinds of shapes in these graphs. Certainly the hub is an important shape, the person with the most connections. But there are features in network analysis that help us identify, let's say, the person with just 2 connections, but whose connections are more valuable than somebody with 200 connections. And how could that be? How could you have just 2 connections and have them be more valuable than having 200 connections? And the answer to that is that you might be the bridge. That's my bridge out in San Francisco. Come see our bridge. 75 years old this year. And of course, the bridge only connects the 2 points, here and there. Here being San Francisco, there being Marin. But the bridge is really important because if you don't have the bridge, then the distance between here and there grows by 134 miles. And so it's really important to be able to get over this bridge because, after all, on the other side of this is wine country, and you don't want to miss that. So bridges are also important. They're perhaps even more important than a hub under certain circumstances. And yet there are other people who have literally no connections, and they also can be important. We call those people isolates or islands. So these are the people who have just no connection at all in the graph. And they turn out to be remarkably important people for some purposes. So the idea of an influencer being a hub or a bridge is pretty obvious, that there are some people there at the center of the conversation, they matter more. But these isolates are actually very important. They don't matter very little. They are very important. And it, of course, depends on what you're looking to accomplish. But if your goal is new customer acquisition, then it's probably very important to pay attention to the islands, because these people are those who have mentioned you but are not yet very committed to you. How do we know? Well, because they have no connection to anybody else we're talking about yet. So you'll see them in several other graphs. We'll talk about the islands. And now we can move up to a higher level. We were talking about the positions of individuals in the graph, but now we can talk about the shape of the graph as a whole. And here, what we're interested in showing is that these graphs have shapes. They have patterns. They are not all the same. So far, you've seen a lot of this first pattern, the divided or polarized crowd pattern. But the good news is that there are 5 additional patterns. And these patterns are even more common than the divided pattern. And the question we will often ask is, which of these patterns is your topic? And then we would ask, which one did you want it to be? So you might be one pattern and not be very happy with where you're at and be interested in migrating to a different pattern. So these are the schematic patterns: divided, unified, fragmented, clustered, and then the in and the out, hub and spoke. And so these different patterns are very important because if you are one and you want to be a different one, that's important to know. You're not in the shape you want to be. So let me show you what this looks like when we actually look at real data. This is real Twitter data, and these are exemplars of the different patterns that we've identified. And what I'll do in the next couple of slides is take you through each of them and describe what you're seeing. I'll note that this map you're looking at, I just made a few minutes ago. This is the Prospect Research Map, and you can get access to this map. Somewhere in here is Graph Gallery. And this is our Flickr for networks, and this is where we put several of the requests that were coming in. You can see a lot of different graphs here. There are pages and pages and pages of them. We're almost at 20,000 graphs right now. And if you click on one, we drill in. And what we can see is essentially the shape of people talking about prospect research. And you can see that G1 has a lot of islands or isolates. These are people who say the word prospect research, but have not said the name of anybody else who also says prospect research. And in contrast, group 2 is a fairly dense group of people who do repeat one another. And some of those people are more at the center than others, and we can find out who they are by rolling down here into the caption. So it describes the data. And here you'll see the top 10 people ranked by betweenness centrality. These are essentially the 10 most influential voices talking about prospect research in the last, well, let's take a look, 7 days in Twitter. So this is a week of people saying the word prospect and research. So here, these are the 10 people who are really at the center of that conversation. And so we can identify them and even see their tweets. But your question was, if I have a list of people I know to be important, could I map the relationships among them? And we would say, yes, go to our NodeXL data import from Twitter users network. This allows you to type in here or put paste the list of names that matter to you, and then you may choose to find out who replies or mentions who, or if you want to, you can also add who follows who, although that can be very costly in terms of time. Twitter dramatically controls the access to the follower edges, those green edges. Very hard to get that data. So the reply and mention data is much easier. So this would give you the set of relationships among a group of people because they all talk to each other. Does that answer your question, Jennifer?
That does, because if we start using things like Twitter for some of these sort of crowdfunding days, like a lot of, what do they call them, money bombs, where a nonprofit will raise, a couple $1 million in one day through like a real urgent campaign style fundraising, they're using social media to spread that word. Mm-hmm. And that's a great opportunity to then not just gather all that and put it in our database, but see like, well, where does that extend and how does that relate back to things we do, like capacity ratings and wealth screenings.
Example of a group of people and their relationships among one another. This group of people are members of the United States Congress. And so C-SPAN maintains a list, U.S. Congress members. There it is, members of Congress, C-SPAN / members of Congress. What we did was point NodeXL at the list, and it then gathered up a collection of their most recent tweets and then found out who mentions who. And of course, G1, Democrats, G2, Republicans, G3, the people who actually work with people across the aisle. So more partisan people in G1 and G2, more cross-party connections in G3. Right, so if anybody has a suggestion for making an additional map, we can very easily do that. I've just selected a new blank NodeXL workbook. I'm going to click on the NodeXL menu. I'll make the screen a little bigger. And then all I have to do is come into the data section. You'll see that there's a data import menu, and then I have a lot of choices. Wikis, Flickr, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and there are even others that have not been added here, and you can add additional info. So we now have one for the Chinese Twitter, Sina Weibo. We've just recently added this one, the Wiki importer. So additional network importers are coming all the time. So we would go in and, let's say, ask Twitter to search for a keyword for us. We already did prospect research. Is there another term that you'd like me to map?
So if I put my college's or my nonprofit's URL into this kind of mapping, what happens?
If it's being mentioned in Twitter, we see a map. So, yeah, sure, send me a link. Let's see. I do this all the time with New York Times articles to see, who paid attention to that article. So, for example, there's a big movement to change how people have access to e-cigarettes. So I was doing a lot of e-cig maps. And public health departments have hired me to try to find out who is supporting e-cigarettes and who does not. So here in the most recent article, and you're going to see this coming out a lot over the next year or so, the CDC and the FDA are going to try to regulate e-cigarettes. And so I can make a map of this. Now, if you have a different map, you just let me know. I'd be happy to use whatever you are. So Metro Min, is that right?
Yep.
And so one thing that we could do is just come to Twitter search and we say, did anybody ever mention metromin.org in Twitter? And the answer is no, never been mentioned. Right, so that might, the actual URL in this case might not work. Let's take a look at metromin, the hashtag, or the user ID. And there we do have some traffic. Not a lot of traffic, but some traffic. It looks like we've got, a handful of tweets in the month of May. So they go back to April really quick. So not a lot of tweets, but we could take Metro Min, hop over here, type it in there, hit OK, and we're done. This is going to go and get the data. It's going to map the data, visualize the data. It'll even upload the data to Graph Gallery, all automatically.
And this is what happens when you download the NodeXL product?
Yes.
Wow.
This is NodeXL out of the box. You can modify NodeXL to add importers for things like YouTube and Facebook and Exchange email. That's a particularly interesting one. You can map the communication network of a corporation in under an hour by connecting NodeXL to the Exchange server, logging in and collecting all the mail, and then building connections based on who replies to who. And so we can do that within any enterprise, particularly if they're using Exchange email. That'll make it very easy. It's almost done processing the Metro Min network. It's not that big a network. And soon it'll draw the picture. There's the picture. And it even uploaded that picture to Graph Gallery. We can see that this is a fairly small network, mostly in the form of a, this would be a hub and spoke pattern. So there's only a few hubs, Metro Mini, Metro Ministries, and Renee and Sharon. And they are talking about Metropolitan Ministries. You really want to know who Renee is. That's right. And what I would say is that there's a strategy that can be executed using these maps. I'm going to jump straight to the strategy slide. Really, two pieces matter most. Most of the time, what you would like is to be able to tweet and have your tweet actually picked up, repeated, and seen by a lot of people. I believe this is our goal. Correct me if I am wrong. NodeXL can be useful in helping you achieve that goal in the following way. It can let you identify the mayor of a hashtag, or the mayor, and I'm using that term loosely to suggest the people who are very much at the center of the conversation. So with many of my clients, what we will do is start with their own name, but very quickly snowball out. And we're looking for names of competitors. We're also looking for names of issues, or activity spaces. So it's not just the name of one sporting good manufacturer, it's the word snowboarding, as well as the name of the manufacturer. So when we have a bunch of these maps, we immediately have a line straight to the people at the center of the map, the people with the highest centrality. This strategy map can very quickly get those people to follow you and make it so that you can create a tweet that actually these people want to retweet. How do we do that? Well, first, we're going to start by making a lot of maps. We're going to make maps of your topic and related topics, competitor topics, and so on. We're going to identify the 10 people who are at the center of each of those. We encourage you and your brand account to follow those people. And we think that 20 to 30% of the time, sometimes a little bit more, you will get those people to follow you back. But that's not a lot of them. And so we then suggest that you monitor their tweet stream. You just started following them. And if they didn't follow you back, you should retweet them. And retweeting often is very much like a follow. It stimulates a follow back. And so if you do these two things, we believe that you could get about 60% of the influential population to now be following you. What you need to be able to do is take those data sets and put them into this format. And I believe, was it Melody Song gave a talk recently for this webinar series?
Yes.
And I watched her talk, and of course she has data from the Calgary Zoo. And they know who their board members are, and they know to a certain extent who their board members know. And they have been successfully using NodeXL to map those webs of relationships in order to identify who the best person is to reach out to get the connection to that more distant person. So you might be 2 or 3 hops away from the person you want, and the question is who could get you closer?
Hi, Meredith.
I was thinking, you know, I work for Heifer International and get retweeted and that sort of thing. However, I've never really looked at our social media if it would be useful to find some of the hub people that they can identify, and then maybe those would be candidates for, or to isolate them to research, see who among them has capacity, people that maybe we don't necessarily know has capacity now, but it would identify people for research.
Heifer International, there you are, at Heifer. Let's take a look at you, shall we? I think what we'll do, since that is an object, what we'll do is say we want mentions of you like this, which is a little bit more narrow than all mentions of, I guess, that's a baby cow, is that right? And so we're getting the list of Heifer mentioning tweets and hashtags. And as you'll notice, once the data is downloaded, look what happens. Notice that this whole sort of automation process kicks in. It's just going to do all of the various steps, and there are quite a few of these steps necessary to process your data, and all of that happens automatically. So you can do this manually. You can say, I want to do this and I want to do that, and I'm going to do these in this order. Or you can simply hit this button over here. It says Automate, and Automate just does it. And we have recipes for automation that we provide people. And it is possible to go to Graph Gallery, for example, download a recipe and have NodeXL run that recipe against your disk. And there we go. This is it. So this is the Heifer, at Heifer or hashtag Heifer International. And apparently Reverb Nation has something to do with this. They are talking about you in what way? Let's see.
I don't know who Reverb Nation is.
Well, now it's worth knowing. So somebody just joined Music for Good on Reverb Nation, and now half of our song sales are donated to at Heifer. Whereas at Heifer says you're invited to an event, East in the Field, the Farm to Fork event. And you created a kind of broadcast structure. That was one of the 6 patterns. And these people retweeted you but for the most part, they're not talking to each other. And that is one of the suggestions that this data leads us to, is the question of how do I get the graph I want? So this is the slide I'd like to show you. This suggests that you should walk down the road until you find the pattern that resembles your pattern, and then move across the columns until you find the pattern that you wish you could be. And then at the intersection, you will find the probability and the metrics you would need to use as KPIs in order to evaluate, that make that transition, to move from one of these patterns to the other. So right now, your pattern is, for the most part, this is the broadcast pattern. You tweet, a lot of people retweet you. And so your goal might be to become more of a community, or at least a clustered community. And this suggests various ways of accomplishing that. So with that, let me close by giving you this URL. If you want to request a map of your own choice and you don't want to go through the process of downloading NodeXL and installing it and learning how to use it, you can just get its output by going to connectedaction.net and requesting one. And then, of course, Connected Action provides that as a commercial service. So the Social Media Research Foundation gives away software, but Connected Action provides business services on the process.
Thank you.
So, appreciate it. If you do have questions or you would like to request a map, either go to connectedaction.net or come send me an email at marc with a C at connectedaction.net.